So please welcome, first up, the wonderful Mr. Tommy Sheppard, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, folks. As somebody once said in a different context, I congratulate you on your indefatigability. I wanted, like Stuart Kirkpatrick, to start where we finished off last time. I well remember in the hours of the morning of the 19th of September, late morning it was, coming to, after a few fitful hours sleep, having absorbed on the television the results of the referendum the day before. And I remember through the bitterness of defeat and the sadness beginning to reflect on what we had actually achieved during that campaign. And the achievements were massive. We had run an energetic, positive campaign the length and breadth of this country. We had mobilized our fellow citizens to take part in politics and to turn out in this political decision on a scale unprecedented, not only in this country, but in any country in Western Europe. It was a remarkable achievement. In doing so, we had given people hope and inspiration that through enterprise and solidarity, we could build a much, much better country than the one in which we lived today. And it was a message of hope which has not gone away. The remarkable successes that we achieved saw 45% of the population of this country vote to secede from the fifth most powerful power on the planet, in spite of a massive campaign of disinformation and bias against us. It was, by any standards, a remarkable achievement. But we lost. And of course, we soon began to know in the days and weeks after that campaign that though we had lost, this was very much unfinished business. Unfinished for a number of reasons. Because the vote was so close, because of the energy and education of the movement for change, and also because the victory for those that won was contingent on conditions which they could not control. And therefore we knew that there was going to be this question put again. There will be a second referendum on the question of Scottish independence. The debate or the discussion is whether it will happen before 2020 or whether it will happen after that. Now and I suspect many of you in those early days after the last referendum thought that that we were in for a long game, that whilst we would get to ask the question again, it would probably be into the 2020s before we could legitimately do so. But something happened, and that was Brexit. Because what Brexit has done has changed the deal that was put on the table on the 18th of September 2014. And now we're in a situation that if there is an early referendum, and there may be, it will not be because the people who lost the result did not accept it. It will be because the people who won broke their promises and would be seen to do so on a false premise. And there are two aspects to that. The first is that we were told by Better Together that voting no, voting against independence, voting to stay in the Union would make us part of Cool Britannia, this modern, progressive, fair-minded European country that was playing a major role in the world. And our attitudes and our beliefs would be better reflected and better communicated to the world through that union. And we were told also that the union wasn't a matter of the character and the intention of the people of Scotland being subjugated, being diluted, being washed away by a much bigger neighbour, but it was a partnership built on equal respect, where the views of this country and the needs of this country would be respected in that union. Both of those things are on the verge of now coming not to pass. Rather than Cool Britannia, we are now looking at a Fortress Britain which turns its back on the world whilst it is riven with ethnic division amongst its own communities. A Britain that will be governed forever and a day by a permanent Tory majority at Westminster. That is not the vision that people voted for in 2014. And rather than respect for the needs of this country and the aspirations of its people, we are now in a situation of the will of the people of Scotland expressed on the 23rd of June being overridden and ignored by a much larger neighbour. Now, we will see in what pans out over the next 2 or 3 months whether indeed respect does mean respect, or whether in fact we were sold a pup in 2014 and we need to reconsider the proposition that was put on September the 18th. When we do that, sorry, 1 second. I don't normally use notes, but I thought I'd make a few. So the situation we're now engaged in, I think, and we haven't really dwelt on this so far today, but we have a situation where the Scottish Government is trying to discharge the mandate on which it was elected in May of this year, and it is also trying to represent the opinions of this country as expressed on the 23rd of June. And it has put forward a proposal, and I would commend it to you and read it online if you have not done so, the framework document for Scotland in Europe, which sets out how the post-Brexit arrangements could and should be different in Scotland in order to try and protect our interests and in order to respect the aspirations of our electorate. That basically says that Scotland should remain a member of the European Economic Area, and that different powers should now come to the Scottish Parliament in order to make that happen. That the powers that are repatriated from Brussels in terms that the Scottish Government already has control over, such as fishing and agriculture, they should go straight to Holyrood. That other powers, such as those to do with employment that are being repatriated, rather than go to Westminster, should go straight to Holyrood. And crucially, that additional powers should be given to the Scottish Government in order to allow Scotland to make its own international arrangements with other European countries. Now, that is not a case for independence, and it is not a case for Scotland being a member of the European Union. It is, in fact, a major compromise offer by the SNP Scottish Government to the British Government. And we will see whether or not that is taken in the spirit in which it was offered, and whether they are genuinely going to allow Scotland to be different. And of course, the only plausible argument against this, because it is a practical, well set out, not without challenge, but a well set out and doable prospectus that the Scottish Government have produced. But the only argument against it is that Scotland should not be allowed to have any separate arrangements. And of course, if you follow that, then why on earth should Scotland be allowed to have a Scottish Parliament? Why should there be a Scottish separate legal system or separate education system, which there is? The only people that could possibly suggest that would be the tiny minority who refuse to accept that Scotland is a country and think that we are just part of Northern England. And that is a minority who I think will not prevail. So it may well be that the British government does accept this. I don't know. I haven't got a crystal ball. If they do, then I think these powers taken together would constitute another major process of devolution, and we should take them and we should bank them. And that means that the justification for having an early independence referendum disappears, but we should then prepare to seek a fresh mandate to complete the journey for our country post-2020 and use that election in order to go forward so that we have a mandate which is not conditional on Brexit or Europe or anything else, but simply gives the people of Scotland the opportunity to say, now is the time to finish the job. I realise I appreciate the sort of political choreography that the Scottish Government is involved in at the minute is in many ways confusing and murky. I mean, in part because the Scottish Government is trying to negotiate with a British government that doesn't appear to have the first clue about where it wants to go or how it's going to get there. So this process is proving murky and unclear. And I know from speaking to branches and speaking to yes groups around the country that this is causing a degree of frustration. And people are saying, well, why are we doing this? Why can we not just get on with it? Well, I want to say to you that I think we need to separate the process that the Scottish Government is engaged in from the campaign for independence for our country. because we are too fixated on questioning when is the next date for the Scottish referendum, the second referendum going to be? When is the date going to be? How long have we got to campaign? Long before we decide when the date's going to be, we have got work to do in terms of defining what the offer is. And in terms of what some people, I was very impressed by some of the contributions earlier, but we have got a lot of work to do to answer the questions that were raised in the 2014 campaign and to take account of changes in the world and in the UK since that last campaign took place. And in doing that, I think we should declare that 2017 is the year in which we provide the big answers to the questions that we have not been able to answer. 2017 should be the year in which we make sure we get our story straight, so that when we go to the Scottish electorate again, we have a convincing, joined-up case with no gaps and no flaws, and people may disagree with some of it, but it will be coherent and it will make sense. And that means that we need to talk in particular about the economy, because we cannot continue much longer in a situation where many people genuinely believe that Scotland is an economic basket case and we can't afford to be independent because there is this mythical 15 billion black hole, and the day after we become independent, services collapse, their pensions disappear, and everything crumbles to the ground. That is not a prospectus for success. And I do say that whilst it will be for individual political parties to say what type of economy Scotland should have, whether, as I would like to see, it should have a much higher degree of public regulation on the operation of private enterprise, whether it should have a much higher proportion of our wealth devoted to the public realm. But those would be questions of politics between parties. But what we do need as a yes movement to be clear about is that the potential of this country to be economically successful is without question. We are a highly developed country, rich in renewable energy and many other natural assets. We have a well-developed social and physical infrastructure. If any country in the world could become independent, it would be Scotland. And I think we have to make that case convincingly. There are... And that just as an aside, I mean, I want to say also, because I can sense that this is the way it's going, I think also the time has come to say that if we want our own government, which is capable of investing in our economy and making sure we develop and modernise our industry to the extent that it can be, then that government is going to have a central bank behind it, which is under its own control, and we are going to have our own currency in order to pay for it. I think, because one of the lessons that we learned from 2014 is that it is very difficult to go into a campaign where one of your central policy points is dependent upon the consent of your opponents. And therefore, the next time we run a campaign, we need to be clear that what we are saying we can offer, we can do within Scotland using the political power that we seek from the electorate. Now, I know it has to be tested. I'm not suggesting that we start printing the leaflets just yet. We should spend this year to look at the options, to test the possibilities, as Robin McAlpine said, to see the downside as well as the upside. But I think by the end of it, we should come out with a belief that we can actually run our own economy and we can run our own currency, and that will make us in a stronger position going forward. There are other things, I think I'm probably running out of time, but there are other aspects of the debate that I think we need to challenge as well. We need to project a new vision of Scotland, which not only is economically successful and prosperous for all its people, but which also is a new democratic country. We need to begin to talk about democratic renewal. And as Angela Constance said at the beginning, we need to find ways to harness the energy, the enthusiasm, the positivity of our movement if we win our independence, to then build our better nation, to have all of those people engaged and to modernise the way in which we see our community governed at all levels, from the street to the nation. because we can no longer simply go on with a system of local government that was designed, whose structure and finances was designed by Lord Forsyth and Lord Heseltine. This is an outdated system built by Tories a generation ago. Now, I think we've seen today that actually talking about policy and talking about the detail can be, I wouldn't say it's good fun, but it can be of interest. It's something that we can do, and it's something that people can focus on. I want to say to you, there is not a dichotomy between doing this stuff and working out the prospectus and running a campaign to then win our independence. The two things go hand in hand. So I want to say to SNP branches, other party branches, to yes groups, to yes activists, this is the year in which we put the band back together and we get people discussing what type of Scotland they want to see if we win our independence. We engage them in these discussions. We involve them, particularly the people who voted no last time, particularly the people who said, oh, well, yeah, the heart says yes, but the mind says no, or yes, but not yet, or we can't afford it. All of those people, all of those I-curious, as I've described them, we bring them into the fold. We have a dialogue with them. We examine the policy options with them. And the process of doing that, I believe, will then put us on a very much stronger footing for when the firing pistol is started and we begin to win the campaign for votes. Now, a final word just in closing, because we're talking about campaigning and movement. I just want to talk about the SNP and the wider movement, because I do think there's a tendency, particularly in the media, maybe not with us, but sometimes with activists as well, to conflate what the SNP government are trying to do in Holyrood under incredibly difficult conditions, I have to add, imposed by the Westminster government, and under incredibly weird situations that we now have in this post-Brexit world. Some people conflate what they're trying to do and their objectives with the movement for independence. The two are not the same thing. We have a much bigger grassroots movement, and we need to be able to have the patience and the respect to allow the team at Holyrood to do the best that they can in those difficult circumstances, but not to conflate that with the need to build a case for independence, which is something that should go on all of the time. So we don't need to wait for anyone to get going in this campaign. Now is the year, after we've had all our referenda and we've had all our elections, now is the year to begin to focus and try and regroup and take this campaign forward. And in doing that, I remember, you'll know that I'm not been in the SNP that long. Well, it's beginning to feel like a long time, but it's not really. And I remember 5 years ago, actually, attending a Scottish Independence Convention meeting, because I've been involved in that for a lot longer. And it was at the start of the 2014 referendum campaign. And I remember saying then that we need to congratulate and admire and really appreciate the way that the role that the SNP has contributed to this country, because if it wasn't for the efforts of those people, not just in the last few years, but for decades before, if it wasn't for their efforts, we wouldn't have got the question on the ballot. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to have a yes movement and to try and mobilise our citizens. So I am in no doubt about the contribution the SNP has made. But I said then that the SNP by itself can get it on the ballot paper, but it cannot take us over the 50% mark just by itself. And to do that, we need to engage. To do that, we need to engage with other people who agree with the principle that it is the people who live in this country who should control their own affairs and no one else. And we need to build a much wider movement for national autonomy and self-determination. And the SNP remains committed to that and will do that at every level. And I want to say to some other people as well, because I've heard these arguments suggested, that whilst this cannot be done just by the SNP, it cannot and will not be done without the SNP neither. So all of us need to work together. And I suspect I've had my 10 minutes, so let me finish by saying that I think the other achievement of the last referendum campaign, and one that's in the bank, and one that's not going away, is that we moved the idea of Scotland being an independent country from some sort of abstract, sometimes romantic notion to become a hard-headed, practical prospectus for how you create a new country. That's in the bank. That's not going away. We need to refine it, we need to build on it, and we need to regard the 18th of September 2014 not as a climax, not as the end of anything, but as establishing the base camp for the new campaign in which we will win.